Good afternoon. My name's Rebecca Leonard. I am a planner, urban designer, and landscape architect at Lionheart. We are working with the Midtown District to develop Midtown Houston District to develop a parks, public space master plan that will guide the investment in capital improvements over the next several years. With me today, I have Erin Odland, who is also a landscape architect and working on the project with me as well. So this is a recording of the presentation that was given in June. It's at the very beginning of the process, and we were simply asking folks for their comments on goals and reaction to some existing conditions. Here's the schedule, the full schedule for the project. First, we start with really caring about the topic, and Erin and I have been working in Midtown for many, many years with the Midtown District on parks and streetscapes. Then we start to think about how we're going to do the project. And at that point, we created a project management plan, a stakeholder engagement strategies, and drafted a first set of goals and metrics for the project. And we will be talking about those goals a lot tonight and getting your reaction to them. So they're not fully baked yet. They are ready for your comment. We had a kickoff meeting with the advisory committee a couple months ago. And then we started off in what we call the investigate phase, where we analyze existing conditions or baselines. We look at comparable districts and urban neighborhoods like Midtown and look and see what they have going on in terms of parks and public spaces. We look at the various programming and codes that apply to those things. And here's where we are today at the Values and Vision Workshop. Where we'll be getting your reaction to the goals. We'll also be getting your feedback on existing conditions. From here, we'll start into a task we call Create. And during that task, we'll be generating ideas for parks and public spaces, which include streets and plazas and other and entry portals. We'll be creating an implementation roadmap. So once some of these ideas are generated, how feasible are they to actually implement? We even look forward to prototyping some of this, sometimes in the computer and sometimes physically out in real space. And when we do, we'll let you know and we'll get your comments on that and really test the effectiveness of some of these strategies. At that point, we'll have what we call a creative solutions workshop, where we will open this back up to the advisory committee and several other stakeholder groups, as well as a big public workshop and hopefully a life scale prototype. Finally, we move into the share task, which is where we draft up the plan, and that should be finished by the end of the year, in which case the Midtown Management District and Redevelopment Authority will adopt this as the plan for moving forward. We don't always have a build phase and a review phase in every project, but we create all of our projects with that in mind. So the next phase of work after this one wraps up will be to actually create, build and construct some of the improvements that are identified in this study. So next slide. We've reviewed a number of documents to really get a good sense of the context for the project. Some of these documents are documents that Midtown has created, and we've actually helped in many of these cases. First was the Parks and Open Space Master Plan that was adopted in 2011. This one included all the parks and really started to create the baseline, a snapshot of where you were in terms of access and opportunity around parks and open space in 2011. We looked at the Midtown Cultural Arts Master Plan, which was adopted in 2015. And again, we also helped contribute to this study. During that time, it was identified where several cultural institutions, cultural sites were in the district and how to maximize their impact and really build awareness and love and loyalty to those cultural institutions and locations in Midtown. And then finally, the Midtown Houston Strategic Framework. Every few years, the district has to do an update to their strategic framework. And during that time in 2018, we were able to look at progress from the previous one and really understand how the various investments that the district is making on behalf of its citizens are moving the needle on some of the goals for the district. Next slide. We also looked at a number of other plans that impact Midtown. So these are plans that are for areas around Midtown or that overlap with Midtown. So the Parks and Open Space Master Plan for the City of Houston includes components of parks and public spaces in Midtown as well. We also looked at the incentives for green development document that was created in Resilient Houston, both identifying and help creating opportunities for green infrastructure. We looked at the bike plan for Houston and what recommendations they have for Midtown. We looked at the downtown districts plan and to see what was happening on the edge of our community. We looked at the walkable places and transit-oriented development codes and the various conversations that led up to those to understand how they have opportunities and challenges as it relates to parks and public spaces. And then finally, we looked at the North Houston Highway Improvement Project to see what sort of plans TxDOT has for the major corridors that surround the district. The goals, these initial goals are here for your reaction. So don't think of them as set in stone yet. We have an online poll that couples with this presentation. We'll have a QR code for that at the end. And you can also find it on the Midtown website. We want your feedback on these. So these may not be right yet, but these goals came from those various documents that have already been created for Midtown, as well as some early dialogue with an advisory committee that was put together for this project. So I'm going to go over each one individually on the following slides here. Let's start with the next slide on destination quality. So the idea with this goal is to continue the progress that Midtown has made of being a citywide destination to live, work, and play. When we first started working with the district, maybe 15 years ago, there were so many corridors that were high-speed corridors that were really about getting people through Midtown. There's been a lot of progress over the last 10 to 15 years about getting people to understand all the wonderful things that Midtown has to offer and creating destinations internally. So some possible strategies will be to provide better pedestrian and bicycle connections to these parks, public spaces, and cultural institutions so that people can access it easily from elsewhere. Another one might be to develop small interventions like tactical urbanism that can happen quickly and large interventions that will make meaningful change in Midtown. So having kind of both ends of a spectrum. Something that can happen quickly, but maybe doesn't solve as many problems, but maybe solves a really important problem, to large interventions that may take longer to get more stakeholders involved and also more funds to make happen. Another strategy might be to complement other applicable plans in Midtown and seek input from those agencies and support for developing those ideas. So a lot of various agencies have visions for what is to happen in and around Midtown, and to the point that the community in Midtown supports those ideas, maybe there's an opportunity to have some support implementing them. I wanted to say before I went on to the next one that we're asking on this online poll as well for your ideas about possible strategies to implement this goal. So these are just possible strategies. If you go to the online poll, then you can provide your feedback about other ideas that you would like us to test during this process. So the second goal is about making park and public space infrastructure more resilient. This could be addressing maintenance and the protection of our investments through, resiliency planning, through better maintenance and operation strategies. Another strategy could be to use crime prevention through environmental design or CPTED techniques to enhance the safety of parks and open space. We've last fall, the district put together a survey, an online poll, and there was a lot of write-in statements about the need for more security and and enhanced safety. Another one might be to integrate green infrastructure into parks and public spaces to increase climate resiliency. There could be many more possible strategies, and we're looking forward to your help identifying some of those. Next goal, please. So the next goal is about design and program parks and public spaces that reflect the culture and innovative spirit of Midtown. Midtown's has quite a reputation for its arts, its culture, its willingness to embrace new ideas and to innovate. So what are some possible strategies? We could introduce more cultural elements to the parks and public spaces. This could be art installations. It could be performance opportunities. We could develop park designs with innovative approaches to forms and functions. Perhaps it's green. It's a green technology that maybe the lights are solar powered, or maybe it's about providing better access to communication opportunities like Wi-Fi. We could collaborate with researchers to measure success of evidence-based interventions. So continuing to prove that the investments that Midtown is doing are helping to achieve the goals of the district. Next slide. The next one is about health and wellness, increasing the health of nearby residents by creating easy access to parks, public spaces, and cultural institutions. So we could develop what we call hard and soft programming. Hard programming is like things that are built in parks, and soft programming is events that are planned in parks. We could have more of those that really key into a range of activities and that help with physical health, but also mental health as well. We could look at strategies about preserving and enhancing existing natural assets, such as shade trees or drainage areas. We could provide habitat value for birds, pollinators, and other wildlife in the parks and public spaces that you have in the district. Next slide, please. The next one is about expanding equitable access to parks and public spaces resources. So we've been tracking for about 10 years now how much of Midtown is within a short walking distance to park space, and that has been increasing. Quite a vast percentage of Midtown is within a walking distance of a park, making sure everybody has access to parks. Provide walkable access to a diverse range of public programming in these park spaces. So not just that you have access to a green space, but that green space actually has a variety of program elements in it. And then increasing access to Midtown for surrounding neighboring communities. This is really important as we continue to define Midtown as a destination for others, as well as a home to its residents. Next slide, please. Erin's going to walk you through some of our existing conditions, and again, on the online poll, you could provide some feedback on these goals, these strategies, and anything you see here related to existing conditions.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. As she mentioned earlier, when looking at this parks and public space plan, the key is that public space encompasses a lot of different types of areas. So we're really focusing not just on the parks, but also on the streets, as those being an important public asset. So as we go through these existing condition slides, you'll see we focus on parks, the entry portals, and the street elements as well. This first slide, though, is really looking at areas that we would perceive as park spaces. And the key takeaway here is that these different types of spaces that you may look upon as parks could have different ownership and management. As an example, in the middle here, this dot is HCC campus. And while that has a feeling of a public park space, it actually is operationally managed and controlled by the community college. Another thing I want to note on here is this outside boundary, the beige one, shows a quarter-mile radius, sorry, a quarter-mile offset from the district boundary. And that quarter mile is that easy walking distance that Rebecca mentioned earlier. It's about a 5-minute walk. So when we're thinking about those park spaces that are accessible to people who are residents or coming from Midtown, there's some areas outside, such as Emancipation Park on the east side, that has amenities not found in Midtown parks, such as the pools they have there. It can be an asset for Midtown residents. Also, I wanted to point out that the expansion of Midtown district boundary to include some of the museum district area expanded what was considered as the park elements from the 2011 Parks and Open Space Master Plan that Rebecca mentioned earlier. These are just some photo examples of these different types of spaces. So in the middle here, middle top, you've got Midtown District, the Midtown Park there, one of the newer parks in the area that right in the middle of the district. To the right of that, you've got a Sparks School. And if you're not familiar with the Sparks program, it's allowing the use of school spaces as publicly accessible parks after hours when schools are closed. In the bottom right, you have HCC Plaza. That's on the HCC campus I was just talking about earlier. And on the bottom left is the Menil Park. So that's by the Menil Museum. It was one of those newer additions to the Midtown district boundary. So this slide here shows on the left, we have a numbered key that shows the names of all these park spaces that we were shown before. The darker green ones are the ones that fall officially within the boundary. The lighter green ones are the ones outside of the boundary, but within that 1/4 mile offset from the district. That still makes them an easy walk in many cases for residents. So out of the ones that are shown here, 11 are within Midtown, and the rest, as I mentioned, are within about that 1/4 mile walk. Now, Rebecca mentioned that equitable access to parks has been an important component of what we've been tracking through time. So this is the most recent example of that mapping. You can see on the key on the left here that the light, kind of lighter orange colors are the 1/4 mile park buffer. That means any direction from example from Midtown Park, you can go radius a 1/4 mile out, 5-minute walk. And you see the darker orange color. These are areas we're calling underserved. Those are ones where you're not have that access to one of those parks. So while the majority of the district is, as was mentioned before, does fall within that, there's still an area, a few areas that historically have not had it, and still that's the case. One of them being by Pierce Elevated up there in the northeast corner, one of the largest and most obvious ones. This slide shows a comparison of how those conditions have changed through time. You can see on the first number here, 1, there were 2 large parks in 1994. Moving to 2012, some additional parks came online and gave more access. And then 2017, you see as an example, Midtown Park opening here in the middle, and that really gave a lot more close access for a lot of residents in that central area. And the goal with creating this plan is to be able to come up with recommendations on other spaces that can help fill the gaps. Now, in the previous goals, we had talked not only about access to parks in general, but also that the programming, both the hard and soft programming, wanting those to be equitable as well. So in our field visits, we looked at that hard programming, those physical elements in particular, in a lot of different parks in the district. This included a range of things from playgrounds, active recreation, dog parks, performance events. So there are 8 of them tracked here, and those were the ones we decided we were going to analyze for all of the parks. And this chart shows what program is occurring in which different park. So on the left is the key of all those different items. If you see on the right, you've got the names of the parks on the bottom, then quantity of program activities under there. Herman Park, which we only touch a bit of in the district, but it has definitely by far is a park overall the most program. Midtown Park comes in second here. You can see it has quite a lot of different type of physical program elements. In general, the average is about 3 program spaces. Lawn and open space being the most common program through the different parks. And similar to that previous map that showed the park access, this is looking at the park program density and the access available. So you see kind of those darker areas, which in the key are indicated no program. Those dark blue areas, those are areas where we have no parks. So of course, there's no program. But if you look at Midtown Park in the middle, the previous slide we saw it had a lot of different types of program elements. So you can see, that's one of the best examples of success of being able for the people to, between there and Baldwin Park, between those two parks in particular, having access to a lot of different types of programs. Similar to that park access diagram, this is a series of maps going back from the previous plans that shows how this has changed through time. It's somewhat related to where new parks have occurred. But we do think there's some opportunities in our future create phase and recommendations to come up with strategies to offer more programs, perhaps to more park spaces to improve that equitable access. This is a map showing the existing conditions on the roadways throughout Midtown. This is taken from City of Houston GIS information. So it's definitely the most car focused in what it's talking about. On the left here, we've got the key. So the key is organized in terms of a hierarchy of how big those streets are in general and what volumes of traffic they're funneling through. So the major thoroughfares being the ones with the most traffic going through them potentially or desired to link cars to certain areas. Major collectors after that, minor collectors. And then you do have the freeway and expressway, so those are perhaps the largest actually. And the local roads are the black lines here. Just wanted to note there are certain areas through Midtown, for example, on the west side, where there are a lot of the major collectors and in couplet format. They're one-way streets going each way, connecting the freeway to and from downtown. We also wanted to point out that the NHHIP plan will impact several of the freeways on the edges, including Pierce Elevated on the north side, and also on the south side, an area of that freeway it's going to be sunken as well, and having that potential cap and stitch condition there. These are some example photos of street types in case you're not familiar with these different types of roadways. So upper left is a major thoroughfare. It's Fannin. So you've got 5 lanes there. It's a one-way street. The major collector is very similar to that. Minor collector, you start to see that the streets shrink down, and your local roadways like Helena on the bottom right. So you have a much more modest volume of cars potentially on there. Another element of the streets and the street public space are the transit connections there. Not only the red line, which is the orange line on the map that goes through Midtown, and but also the numerous bus routes. So the orange dots on here indicate the different bus stops. And then we also have in blue the different bus routes. So we wanted to point out just the Metro Rail, of course, is a major north-south collector in Houston, and it has several stops in Midtown. And the bus routes are heavily concentrated in the west side of Midtown in particular. A lot of those streets largely stemming from I-69 corridor. One of the plans that Rebecca had mentioned when we were talking about the documents we were looking at was the walkable places guide. And Midtown was one of the pilot areas for that. And the focus of this was try to improve the walkability and pedestrian experience in the street. So whereas the GIS information we were looking at was more car focused, this plan is more pedestrian focused in that experience. As you can see how there are 2 main hierarchies of streets. There's these primary streets and the secondary streets. On the right are a couple diagrammatic sections that show some differences between those two. I'd say one big general condition is that you have this 20-foot pedestrian realm on the purple, these primary streets. And on these secondary streets, you have a 15-foot pedestrian realm. So it's a smaller. So this will be one of those baseline conditions that we will dig into more as we're developing recommendations on how we could think about the hierarchy of streets in Midtown in terms of them as complete streets that are built and operate for pedestrians, bikes, and vehicles. Related to that, there's a website, an organization called WalkScore that analyzes walkability of areas. They look not just at human comfort of street trees and sidewalk widths, but also at the ability to have access to amenities. And Midtown scores here an 87. You can see on the left where we fall in the ranking. which that the greener it is, the higher the ranking. You head down to the yellows and reds, it's less walkable according to their scores. So you can see Midtown, compared to some other areas of Houston, is quite walkable according to this metric. These are some examples of some photos of the sidewalk conditions, and there is quite a bit of variability. So when I was mentioning before about developing a hierarchy of streets and thinking about prioritizing pedestrian comfort, like I mentioned, we do want to get a baseline of comfort on those walkable streets according to this primary and secondary, but there's opportunity to enhance that even further. The bottom left, you have Bagby near the Pierce intersection. That's one of the recent capital improvement projects by Midtown, which added paving and planting and rain gardens and street trees, and had a lot of elements in street lighting for safety. So that's sort of a higher end of amenities applied to a street. And then as a maybe opposite end of the current spectrum, you have, if you zoom in on the walk score, I found this location in Fannin and Rosedale, very narrow walks, no street trees, so not quite as amenable now. So when we talk about creating priorities and hierarchy and improving things, this is the sort of range that we're looking at as our baseline conditions. Moving on to our two-wheeled friends, we have the bike lanes here. We have mapped from the GIS data from the Houston bike plan, the existing bike lanes as well as the proposed plans. So HC in this instance means high comfort. So in general, the faster the vehicular traffic, the more vehicles, and then the less separated a bike lane, you're going to have less comfort on it. So high comfort tends to indicate slower vehicular speeds, more hard separation from the bike lanes and the vehicles, and those sort of things. The other thing we mapped on here are popular B-cycle routes and the B-cycle stations. B-cycle is, of course, the bike sharing program. So Midtown has quite a few of the stations right now. And the B-cycle routes that did seem to be more popular are noted here. There's a slight difference between those and some of the bike routes, which we thought was interesting. We'll delve into a little bit further. These photos, we just wanted to show a few examples of some of the different bike conditions within Midtown, in particular areas where there were existing or proposed bike lanes. On the left, you have Austin Street, which is pretty recently added separated bike lanes going each way. In the middle, you have Caroline Street. They're just finishing up on those improvements to the sidewalks and rain gardens and lighting. But this also has on-street bicycle route through it. And then both Austin and Caroline are north-south, but Gray Street, of course, have the east-west. Another fairly recent improvement where you have some physical barrier with these concrete armadillos and the parking separating the bike lanes going each way. Similar to the walk score, there's also a bike score from the same group. Midtown comes in at a 68 number. It's not quite as high as its walkability score, and the most bikeable areas appear to be around the HCC area. Finally, we had mentioned up at the front about the cultural arts master plan being an important area of focus on what we were thinking of in terms of the destinations, because ultimately, when we think about walkability, it's about getting people to the places they want to go. So this is our first pass at these cultural sites from the most recent information we were pulling from GIS and other sources. You can see there's a cluster of a lot of activity in the center of Midtown. And when we are working towards the sixth phase, this create phase, we definitely will be considering what corridors are the key corridors from that plan, from the cultural arts master plan, connecting the cultural nodes in the district. Finally, we hadn't gotten to mapping the restaurants and performance venues. Those were items that were in the cultural arts master plan. So this was a quick take of looking at some of that. This is a map from the walk score site that shows in general bars and restaurants, which are concentrated more heavily in the western side of Midtown. So that's what we have for existing conditions now. as Rebecca mentioned, there's a survey. We'll have a QR code you can scan shortly, but if you have any additional comments that you want to give to the survey, we'd love to hear them about these existing conditions and get your feedback. Just to take a look real quick again about the next steps. Like we said at the start, our next phase we're going into is this create phase where we come up with ideas and do testing. There will be another public workshop. We're looking potentially near the beginning of October. So we'd hope to see you there. And then after that, we'll be developing the plan, like Rebecca said, which will be the form of a PDF booklet, similar to the type of format that the strategic framework plan was done in 2018. And then hopefully from that, there will be a roadmap to help have some actual improvements. So this is the QR code for the online survey about the values and visions and existing conditions. We'd love to get some more feedback from you. And thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this. And we hope to get your thoughts and help improve Midtown District for all the residents and visitors. Thank you.